In today's video, we will be looking at the most surprising player from the 2024 season on every single team. Now, this is going to be who had the, most unexpected results of their season in 2024. I know this is a little late, but hey, we're in draft season and, draft's coming up soon. Thought I'd do something a little bit different. I saved this for a while. But anyways, here we are. And don't forget, check out W.GG. These are my energy drinks. You see them back here, all kinds of mess over here, pardon that. But you see all these over here? These are my energy drinks. I got like 8 of them, dude. It's delicious. Check them out at W.GG. That's their website. There is a link in the description down below. Check that out. And also, don't forget, if you're interested in sports cards, I am selling a ton. Maybe let me know in the comments. Here's a couple basketball ones. There's a John Morant rookie, and there's a Jaime Jaquez. I've got a signed DeAndre Ayton. I've got a bunch of stuff. Send me teams if you're interested, and maybe I'll look to sell them. Either way, let's get into this video. So here we are, we have our tier list just to keep track, and we will start by division, okay? So first off, the Buffalo Bills, theirs is Khalil Shakir. Khalil Shakir, last year, he had 39 receptions for 611 yards, and this year he had 76 receptions, almost double, for 821 yards. Not so many more yards, but if you watch the Bills this year, you know Khalil Shakir was incredibly impactful at all times. He did a ton of things that helped their team out, and he gets the biggest surprise with how much he just attributed to his team, that wasn't really a factor in the year prior. So, huge help from Khalil Shakir. We'll move on to the Miami Dolphins. The next player is none other than Jonnu Smith. In 2023, he had 50 receptions and 70 targets, and this year he had 88 receptions on 111 targets. A lot of increase there. And also, this year scored 8 touchdowns and had 884 yards. Jonnu Smith was one of the best tight ends in the league this year. And it came off of a year where he did absolutely nothing prior. Wasn't very good at all. I mean, he had like 500 yards, but I mean, he was just a shell of himself from what he was before. So Jonnu Smith had a massive uptick in his ability, and that is a well-deserved praise for him. New England Patriots. This one is Kayshon Boutte. He has got a similar story here. Last year, he had 2 receptions for 19 yards. That's it. This year, 43 receptions for 590 yards and 3 touchdowns. Not that he is their wide receiver 1, but he at least proved that he's a legit option for an NFL receiver. He could be there, maybe they're 2 or 3 down the line for this team. The New York Jets. Jamien Sherwood. He's a linebacker for the Jets, and if you don't know him, I don't really particularly blame you. Last year, he only had 28 tackles, 0 sacks, and I think it was only 40 total tackles or so. This year, he had 98 solo tackles, 2 sacks, and 158 total tackles. He was the best defensive player, not the best defensive player, the best linebacker tackle machine on this defense. And that comes with a team that has Quincy Williams, the guy who led the team the year before. Not a bad player at all. That is a good step up for Jamien Sherwood to take. And, very impressive, just to say the least. Moving on to the Baltimore Ravens. The Baltimore Ravens, for them, it's Rashad Bateman. He had 45 receptions, 756 yards, which was a career high, and 9 touchdowns this year. For Rashad Bateman, though, he's one of those kind of like Khalil Shakir. Yes, his stats didn't seem to change all that much in the grand scheme of things, but Rashad Bateman was a better player this year. Watching the Ravens games, you can see he is a lot more reliable, a lot much of a better player. Just everything he did it with a level of confidence that he'd never really had before. His drop problems were not gone, but better than they had been. So props to Rashad Bateman for stepping up and becoming a bit of a better player this year. For the Bengals, we have Chase Brown, the running back. And for him, he had 44 carries the year before. This year, 229. That's a lot. They had 179 yards the year before, 990 yards this year. And he went from 0 touchdowns to 7 touchdowns. Chase Brown, after they brought in Zach Moss, everybody thought Zach Moss would be their lead back. And honestly, I'm going to toot my own horn here. I didn't. I thought Chase Brown was going to be this team's lead back. And yes, I'm still surprised at what he did, but I'm probably the least surprised out of most people because I like Chase Brown coming out of the draft from Syracuse. I believe that's where he's from. Illinois. I can't remember. Either way, it's an orange team. I'm blanking now. But either way, you get the point. Chase Brown's a guy I really like. I like his ability. And with the Bengals, his type of running back is a very good fit. He had a great season, and just really big props to him for that one. For Cleveland, Jerry Jeudy. The year prior, he had 87 targets. This year, 145. Tons of targets. This year, the year before, he had 738 yards. This year, 1,229. 1,230 yards, basically. And then he had 54 receptions the year prior and 90 this year. Jerry Jeudy was seen as a bust prior to this year. This year, he looked like one of the best receivers in the league. Now, that doesn't mean he is one of the best receivers in the league. He got to prove it. He has had one good year of good football, okay? Let's let him prove himself before we put him as a top 5, 10 receiver. He's probably somewhere between 10 and 15 right now, and that's okay. That's a great receiver right there. But that's a good deal for him. Moving on to Pittsburgh. In Pittsburgh, it's DeShon Elliott, the safety. The year prior, 53 solo tackles. He bumped that up to 73. The year prior, 0 forced fumbles. This year he had 2. And he had 3.5 stuffs. This year, 7.5 stuffs. Not the most numerical increase you've ever seen. But DeShon Elliott, if you watched Pittsburgh Steelers football this year, was probably the best defensive player on the field. And that says a lot with on the field when you have Cam Hayward, TJ Watt, Minka Fitzpatrick, Joey Porter Jr., who all were no slouch. Don't get me wrong. That's how good DeShon Elliott was. DeShon Elliott was incredible. And the fact that he only made like $2.5 or $3 million this year, criminal. Just absolutely criminal. Moving on to the AFC South, we have the Texans. This one is Henry To'oTo'o. The year before, he had 35 solo tackles, 0 sacks, and 2 stuffs. This year, 2.5 stuffs, excuse me. This year, he had 54 solo tackles, 1.5 sacks, and 9 stuffs. A big increase for a guy who didn't really do much the year before. Still a very young player and a lot of room to develop for him. But good to see him just making his room and developing as he goes. For the Colts, Alex Pierce here. He had 32 catches the year before, 37 this year. Only 5 more, but look at the yards increase here. Let me make sure I get this right. He had 514 yards the year before. This year, 824 yards. Over 300 more yards on almost the same amount of catches. Then, he had 2 touchdowns the year before and 7 touchdowns this year. Alex Pierce was the leading receiver for the Colts this past year on a year where Michael Pittman is a good receiver. Josh Downs was expected to take another big jump, but Alec Pierce did that. Good on him. Big props to him there. Moving on to the Jaguars. This is a reverse surprise. This is a bad surprise. You don't want this surprise. And this is the only one on the list, I believe, because, well, that's just where we are. Travis Etienne, in obvious Jaguars fashion, have to go against the grain, be a bad surprise, right? Travis Etienne, he lost almost over 100 carries. He went from 267 to 150. He lost 500 yards. He went from 1,008 yards last year to this year having 558. And then he went from 11 touchdowns to 2 touchdowns. Travis Etienne had a terrible season. And he wasn't even just super injured or anything like that. He just sucked. He was just bad. End of story. The Tennessee Titans. Tony Pollard. Now, let me just go and show you his stats. His stats, 252 carries to 260. Only 8 more, right? He then had, where am I at here? 1,005 yards the year before to 1,079 this year. And he had actually less touchdowns, I believe, 6 to 5. However, I'll admit, I was able to toot my own horn earlier. I'm gonna hold myself back now. I was wrong about Tony Pollard. Absolutely. I'll tell you when I'm right. I'll tell you when I'm wrong. Tony Pollard had a great season for the Titans. Without him, there was no offense for this team. He did so much to keep them moving down the field pretty much at all times. They would have been lost without him. Absolutely. And it takes more than the stats to show you that, but I'm just telling you how it is. Tony Pollard was as incredible as you can be for a Titans team like that was. Another guy who doesn't fill up the stat sheet that much, it's still a very good season, Nick Bonito for the Broncos. He went from 8 sacks to 13 and a half this season. He went from 30 total tackles to 48, which is really good for an edge rusher, and he had a pick. Nick Bonito was not a, super dynamic rusher the year before, but this year he turned into one of the better rushers in the league. Was 3rd in sacks, and that's on a down year, but don't hate him for that. I mean, it's not his problem. He's still 13 and a half sacks is a great year. And he really just, like I said, he didn't necessarily blow up the stat sheet to make himself insane or anything, but he just played better. He was more impactful. Down in and down out, Nick Bonito was a guy you had to worry about. So make sure you give him his props for that. For the Chiefs, kind of a weird one here. Nobody really was super surprising, to be honest with you. Kind of hard to pick here. I went with Kareem Hunt, though, because his career was effectively over, it seemed like. And he went from having 135 carries to 200, 411 yards to 728, and 9 touchdowns to 7. Yes, he did go down in touchdowns, but Kareem Hunt was used as a goal line back in Cleveland. And he kind of kept going down and down and down and down. Every year he just got less and less important. And he ended up getting cut because of that. The Chiefs pick him back up for the second stint with the Chiefs. and he had a really good season. He was only part of the reason they made the Super Bowl. He was very impactful. Just another guy, once again, not the stat sheet going to show you everything, but Kareem Hunt still played a big part in their run to the Super Bowl. Moving on to the Raiders. There's an easy one to guess here, and that is Brock Bowers, but I'm going to go a different route here. Jacoby Myers. Jacoby Myers went from 71 receptions to 87, 807 yards to 1,027 yards, and this was his first time in his career over 1,000 yards. Yes, it may not be the most gaudy stats, but you got to consider who this player is and what he did for this team. Outside of Brock Bowers, there was no one to throw to. Jacoby Myers was able to have his career best season in a year where he wasn't even the number one target. I think that deserves a lot of credit. Brock Bowers does not miss any credit from me, but Jacoby Myers needs his as well, so give him where he's due. And then the Chargers to round out the AFC. This one is Quentin Johnston. This guy actually had a good season. He went from 38 receptions the year before to 55 this year, 431 yards last year to 711 this year, and 2 touchdowns to 8 touchdowns. He caught the ball. That's incredible. For him, if you know who Quentin Johnston is, that's probably more than enough for him to be almost an all-pro. So, that's a joke, but still. Moving on to the NFC. For the Cowboys, we have Rico Dowdle. Rico Dowdle went from 89 carries to 235 and upped his yards by 700. He went from 361 to 1,079 and went from 2 touchdowns to 2 touchdowns. But that's the problem of the Cowboys offense. It was just not very good. However, this was a really solid season from Rico Dowdle, and so much so he was able to, I believe, get extended off of this one. Just really solid season, and from a guy who wasn't really anything prior to this. Moving on to the Giants. There was no one to pick here. I'm going to be honest with you. I had to go with Malik Neighbors because he did have a great season. Don't get me wrong. But 109 yards, 1,200 yards. That's kind of the biggest kicker here. He got up to 1,200. Running backs, receivers, everybody talks about 1,000 yards being a big benchmark. In my opinion, 1,200 yards is kind of a bigger benchmark because that kind of separates, the good from the great, in a sense. Not to say Malik Neighbors is great. Wait for him. Let him develop himself. Don't put unneeded expectations on him, as I always say. But he does deserve some credit for the great season he had, with 7 touchdowns included. Moving on to the Eagles. The Eagles, you could easily say Saquon Barkley, but I'm going to go a different route. I'm going to go with a guy who was nothing and became something, Zach Bond. Zach Bond, listen to this. 30 total tackles last year. 151 this year. That's insane. 20 solo to 93 solo, if I wrote that right. 43, 93. One of the two. I can't read my own handwriting. Sorry. 0 forced fumbles to, is that 5 forced fumbles? That is 5 forced fumbles. Jeez. And stuffs, he went from 2.5 to 15 stuffs. Zach Bond was one of the greatest, most improved players over the 2024 campaign, undebatably. Not even a question about that in my mind. The Commanders, none other to go here than Jaden Daniels. 4,455 total yards this season and 31 touchdowns with only 9 turnovers. A great rookie season. Is it the best rookie season ever? No. And once again, do not hype this guy up unnecessarily. He's not a top 5 quarterback. He's not a top 10 quarterback. He's played 1 year in the NFL. He's a very good quarterback, a very good quarterback prospect. But when you say he's top 10, you give him top 10, top 5 expectations. Don't do that. Let's let him become who he is before we throw on unneeded expectations. Please. Jeez, it's not that hard. Moving on to the Bears. The Bears, I'm going to go with another guy who really kind of made a name for himself again, kind of revitalized his career a little bit, Kevin Byard. This safety was obviously a great safety for the Titans, moved to the Eagles last year and had a terrible year. This year comes over to the Bears, not expecting much out of him, and was probably one of their best defensive players on the field at all times. He went from 75 total tackles to 130, from 50 solo tackles to 80 solo tackles, and from, I'm reading the wrong line, excuse me, no I'm not, 50 solo to 80, and from half stuff last year to 5 stuffs this year. Kevin Byard played his role, and very well he did. And, much needed for the Bears, whose defense really just wasn't great this past year in general. Moving down to the Detroit Lions, Jahmyr Gibbs. He went from 192 carries to 250 carries, so up about 60 or so, right? He went from 945 yards to 1,412 yards. That is about 500 yards increase. And then he had, 10 touchdowns to 16 touchdowns, and he added 200 receiving yards and another receiving touchdown. Jahmyr Gibbs was one of the best offensive players in the league this year, and honestly, in my opinion, could have been the offensive player of the year. And honestly, if you want to really look at it, should the MVP have been Saquon? Maybe. And if with that offensive player of the year spot open, that may have gone to Jahmyr Gibbs, and I think that is very reasonable to say that. So, great season from Jahmyr Gibbs. Really set himself apart from a lot of the running backs in the league this past year. Moving to the Pack, the Green Bay Packers. For them, it was Tucker Kraft. He exited last season, his rookie season, as probably the tight end too. Luke Musgrave looked like he was going to be the better of the two from that 2023 draft class. But this year, Tucker Kraft got 20 more receptions from 31 up to 50. He got 355 yards all the way up to 707 yards, and he went from 2 touchdowns to 7 touchdowns. Tucker Kraft, one of the better tight ends in the league this past year. Not a great one, but a very good one, a very solid one. It's only his second year, so let's give him some time, let him develop, and let's see what he can do for the rest of his career with the Packers. Moving to the Vikings now. Obviously, Sam Darnold, dude. Okay, so this year he had 4,300 yards passing, 66% completion, and a 35-12 touchdown interception ratio. His previous best, right, was in 2019. 3,024 yards, 19-13 touchdown interception ratio, and a 62% completion. He threw for how many? 1,300 more yards, 4 more percent completion up, and 16 more touchdowns, and 1 less pick. What an incredible season for Sam Darnold, which led him to almost being an MVP candidate. And this, you got to realize, Sam Darnold just wasn't great before this, so that's a huge jump up for him. He didn't even play the year prior, basically. He was for the Niners, had like 28 completions or something like that. I'm not sure, something around that ballpark. Really good upgrade for Sam Darnold in his career. Moving to the Atlanta Falcons. For them, it was Darnell Mooney. Darnell Mooney got, 31 receptions up to 64. He went from 414 yards to 990 yards and 1 touchdown to 5 touchdowns. Darnell Mooney, a receiver who was really just kind of signed in Atlanta as like a, okay, bye now, from out of Chicago, was one of the better receivers this season. He, and yes, it's going to happen when you lose a lot of games and you're very pass happy in your offense, but hey, more props to him for catching the ball and getting the yards. You got to give him that much credit at least, right? Moving on. The Panthers. For them, it's Chuba Hubbard. You could argue Bryce Young here, but I'm going to go with Chuba Hubbard. Chuba Hubbard went from 238 carries to 250, so only 12 more. But the yardage here is a big difference. 902 to 1,195. Almost 1,200 yards for Chuba Hubbard. Up 300 yards on just, 8 more carries or something like that? 12 more carries? 5 touchdowns to 10 touchdowns, right? His average went up a whole full yard. 3.8 average to a 4.8 average. That's, a really great improvement. Honestly, without Chuba Hubbard, it's kind of like a Tony Pollard situation. This bad team gets I'm going to say it really terribly grammatically, this bad team gets way badder if you don't have Chuba Hubbard, okay? End of story there. The Saints. For this team, kind of a weird one here. They didn't have a whole lot of players. It was really a bad season for them. Brian Bresee is who I decided to go with, though. Brian Bresee went from 12 solo tackles to 17 and went from 4.5 sacks to 7.5 sacks. Not a bad year. Considering you're a defensive tackle and inside guy, they just don't get as many tackles, sacks, things like that. Give him credit where credit's due. Brian Bresee with a step up in year 2. Love to see him do some more of that going on in year 3. And for the Bucs, the last team in this division, this is Bucky Irving. Yeah, I don't like to go with rookies because there's no really precedent from how much better they get. But no one really thought Bucky Irving was going to be the best running back out of this class, at least for the most part. He had 1,122 yards, 8 touchdowns, and added 392 receiving yards as well. That's a 1,500-yard season. That's an incredible year. And, not that he's a top 5-10 running back, but, man, he might be on his way. Very Jahmyr Gibbs-esque, less of a runner, more of a pass catcher, but still, just a really good player. And excited to see what he can do for the Buccaneers. With Baker Mayfield checking him the ball down, I like that a lot. Moving to the Cardinals. This is a player that I loved coming out of the draft a couple years ago from Syracuse. I know this one. This is Garrett Williams. And Garrett Williams was a phenomenal cornerback this year. I even told you years ago that I wanted the Steelers to draft him, my favorite team, because this guy was great. The only problem was he had to stay healthy. And he stayed healthy this year, and that got him from 19 solo tackles to 40. That's a lot for a corner, if you don't know. That is a lot. From 23 total tackles to 58. That's a lot as well for a corner. From 1 pick to 2 picks, and from 2 pass deflections to 9 pass deflections. That's a great season for a corner. Garrett Williams, a young guy who, as long as he stays healthy, he's going to be a very good corner in this league. Mark my words. He just has to stay healthy because he did have a lot of problems with that in college, as I've already said. Moving on to the Rams. This one I'm going to give to Christian Roseboom. Christian Roseboom, 79 total tackles to 135. Up 60? And then he went from 48 solo to 69 solo, up 21. He went from 2 stuffs to 6.5 stuffs. Really solid season. He's now on the Carolina Panthers, so sad to see him leave the Rams, but had a great season and got himself paid in Carolina. Moving on to the Niners. This one is Jawan Jennings. This guy I will say, he was kind of forced into this situation, but he still had to respond to this situation, and he did just that. After that playoff run last year, he was kind of on fire. This year, he put this season on fire. He went from 265 yards to 975 yards. 700 more yards this season. That's incredible. Went from 1 touchdown last year to 6 touchdowns this year. Went from 19 receptions to 77. This guy, the phone rang, and he answered. That's what he did, and more power to him for that because, yeah, it kind of was a situation where he had to step up, but he didn't have to. There's Ricky Pearsall. Could have done more, What's that other, I think he wears number 19 now. Oh, crap, what's his name? Jacob Cowing? That's right, yeah, Jacob Cowing. He could have stepped up. No, Jawan Jennings took hold of the reins, and he drove his season to almost 1,000 yards. Really good season from him. And finally, for the Seattle Seahawks, we're finishing off with another wide receiver. This one's JSN. Who thought he was going to lead this team in basically every receiving stat this year? If you say you were, you're lying. You are. I know you are. 63 receptions the year before to 100 receptions this year. Heck yeah. 628 yards to 1,130 yards this year. Up about 500 yards. And then 4 touchdowns to 6. JSN was not a player I loved coming out of the draft. He's very much a slot guy, and honestly, I think this might be his best season ever. He's got to make it happen this year, okay? Because if not, this team, they lost DK. They lost Tyler Lockett, 2 high-level, reputable receivers. He didn't have those anymore. He's kind of alone right now. If they don't draft somebody, this guy in a little bit of trouble here because, well, he's not the most talented himself, and I think a lot of his yards and receptions and all those things came off the fact that people were guarding Lockett and DK. What are they going to do this year? They're only going to guard JSN. What's going to happen? I don't know. So, not to condemn him. He had a great year. He has to prove that he can do it again. That's the big key for him. Either way, let me know what you think about this list. Who do you think was the most surprising player from your favorite team? Let me know down in the comments. Thank y'all for watching. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. They don't cost you a single thing, and they help me out a ton. Either way, thanks for watching again, and I'll see y'all in the next one.